Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth. Hello and welcome back to the Family Beacon podcast. My name is Grace Evans. I'm here with Moses Brattrud. It feels really good to say that, you guys. Moses was off the podcast for a few weeks. Moses, did you have a good trip?
I did have a good trip in Italy. It was wonderful. I won't bore our viewers and listeners with all the amazing details of the amazing food that we ate and so forth. But suffice to say, it was absolutely wonderful. However, I am glad to be back with my sweet kids. I miss them a lot.
I can only imagine that's rough, but we're glad to have you back on the podcast too. Guys, this week we have 3 different things to talk about. I'm going to break those down quickly for you, just give you the highlights, and then Moses, of course, will jump into our first story. So first off, we are going to fill you in on a press conference that Renee Carlson of True North Legal recently attended in her capacity as an attorney, and I'll let Moses tell you more about that, but basically it regarded parental rights. And then secondly, I wanted to talk to you guys about baby Indi Gregory, who is a sweet baby girl who lived in the UK and was taken off life support against her parents' wishes, which is a truly heartbreaking story, but I think it's really important for us to talk about. And then finally, our main story of the week is about how recent polls are actually showing how Gen Z is their support for same-sex marriage is actually severely dropping, which is surprising and also really encouraging for us. So that's what we'll be discussing today.
It's Grace's influence, everybody.
No. Can't take credit for that. But, we got some stories this week. Moses, go ahead and take it away and tell us more about this press conference that Renee Carlson attended.
Yes. Just to be clear, it was not a press conference. It was the oral arguments for this court case. And for that, there was a press release. So just to make that clear really quick, I might have written press conference. If so, that was my bad. So there's this group called Moms, and they are challenging a court case in which, I'm not an attorney. I can't get into all the details here. But essentially, there's a court case that challenged Minnesota's parental notification laws for if a minor girl gets an abortion. And a Ramsey County District Court judge threw out that law. So it's sort of in limbo. And then there's a group called Moms, represented by their attorney, Teresa Collette, who is one of Minnesota's best attorneys. She's a professor at St. Thomas. And these are a group of mothers offering maternal support. And they are moms with minor daughters who reside in Minnesota and who seek to defend parents' rights to defend the best interests of their children. So they have sought to intervene in this case as a defendant. And they're able to do this even though the case, even though the judge ruled in a certain way, because they're alleging that the Attorney General, who was tasked with defending these laws, did not do a good job. And frankly, from my perspective, it's really clear that he did not do a good job. So yesterday, Teresa Collette appeared before this panel, and I was able to listen to the oral arguments. And basically, she's saying that moms need to intervene on behalf of thousands and thousands of mothers with minor daughters in Minnesota to truly protect their interests because the Attorney General did not do so. So this is, as with everything in the legal arena, Grace, this is going to take a long time. Renee Carlson of True North Legal was there in support of Teresa and the moms. And I wanted to read to close this portion. I'm really just so grateful and inspired by the moms who are standing up. I think there are more than 60 women who have joined this group and who are standing up for their rights as parents and to protect their own daughters. So I'll just read this quote really quick. Mom's intervention is critical as this case will have a profound impact on Minnesota women as well as young girls and their parents, said Mom's
Mhm.
representative Jessica Chastek, and I've met her, she's great. Creating a culture that, as a rule, allows children to make irreversible, life-altering decisions without the knowledge or input of their parents, the people who know them best and love them more than anyone else, is reckless. Moreover,
Mhm.
without this law, our daughters are at risk of sexual abuse and trafficking by predators who will seek to take advantage of open access to our daughters. It is astounding that a law which simply ensures that parents have an opportunity to be engaged and available for our daughters at a time when they need maternal support the most has been deemed unconstitutional. Even worse, we, moms, have no one to defend us or our young daughters, continued Chastek. With this looming threat to our daughters' health and safety, we are grateful to have had the opportunity to present our argument in court. We are in this for the long haul. And it will be
Wow.
presumably a long haul before this case is finally decided. But I'm just so grateful for attorneys and for courageous women who are standing up for parental rights, who are standing up for their daughter's best interests. There's a great line that Teresa Collette used in the oral arguments yesterday, and I hope I can get this right. She said something like, "This law ensures that mothers are there when their daughters need them most."
Mhm.
And that's, when would a daughter need her mother more than when she is dealing with an unplanned pregnancy?
Yeah,
And
when she's becoming a mother herself.
right. And in almost all cases, who is going to offer more support to that girl than anyone on earth?
Mhm.
Her parents, and possibly specifically her mother. So I
Mhm.
just think this is such an important thing. We'll keep you guys posted as this story progresses. Now, Grace, something really sad that you alluded to, the death of this sweet little girl, Indi Gregory, in the UK. And I hope that I don't get emotional about this, guys, because this is the sort of thing that just gets me right in the gut. Um,
Mhm.
Tell us about this case and what happened.
Absolutely. Many of you have probably seen the headlines, but I wanted to break down the story on here because it's very important for us to be aware of if we're not already, and then also to just see how it applies to us here in America. We know that this could easily happen in America if we don't stand up for parental rights, which is, why I'm so grateful for groups like Moms, like Moses just talked about, standing up for parental rights because it truly is so important. So Indi Gregory, for those of you that haven't heard yet, she was a little baby who was diagnosed with a mitochondrial disease in the UK, and she was on life support at a UK hospital. Um, Even though she was on life support, she was actually still responsive though. And so her parents said in a statement just last month, just so you guys can get a picture of this, of how responsive she was. They said that our daughter responds to us, and on her good days, she is babbling, making noises, moving all her limbs. She can definitely experience happiness. She cries like a normal baby. We know she is disabled, but you don't just let disabled people die. We want to give her a chance. And that's absolutely right. I mean, disabled people are worthy of life. They are just as valuable as someone who isn't disabled. So, really tragically, you guys, a UK judge recently ruled that her life support could be removed against her parents' wishes. And she actually was taken off life support this week and died in the hospital. I want to give you a little bit of a fuller picture here before we add some takeaways. So the doctors at this specific hospital claimed that Indi, quote, needed to be removed from life support so as not to prolong the process of her death. Now, what can we see here from this assumption? Basically, you can see that these doctors had already given up on baby Indi. They forsook their oath to, quote, do no harm, as they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to do any harm to a baby or any human. And, her parents, of course, disagreed. They argued that Indi was disabled, not dying. And, amidst this battle with the court, actually, the country of Italy ended up granting baby Indi citizenship so that she could travel to Italy for medical treatment, because there was actually a hospital in Italy that said, I think this baby's life, we would be able to save this baby's life potentially. So let's transfer her here to this hospital and let's give her some medical attention ASAP. So this hospital in Italy and just the Italian government was very supportive of trying to save her life rather than taking her off life support. There was a statement that the Italian prime minister released. He said, quote, "They say there isn't much hope for little Indy, but until the end, I will do what I can to defend her life and to defend her mom and dad's right to do everything they can for her." And so that is why the prime minister granted her citizenship, which is an incredible idea, I think. And the Vatican City Hospital there said that they would provide care for her. Unfortunately, this request and these measures that Italy took to try to save Indy's life were completely overlooked, and that request was utterly denied by UK Justice Robert Peel. He said in response to all of this, quote, "There is nothing to suggest that Indi Gregory's prognosis would be beneficially altered by the Italian hospital's treatment." And again, he just argued that it was in Indy's best interest to die instead. And so I think this really buys into the mindset that we're seeing not only, of course, in the UK, but in Canada and sometimes here in America, that if your quality of life is lower, then it's better for you just to die, which of course we know is not true. Here in America and in any country in the world, we should work to end the suffering, but not the sufferer. And, people even use this argument all the time for abortion. If a baby has Down syndrome or some sort of disability, they'll say, oh, this baby should just be terminated because it's better for this baby to die than to live and to suffer, which is heartbreaking. So Indy's life support was removed on November 13th, which is so tragic. And in response, her father stated, Indy's life ended at 1:45 a.m. Claire and I, that's the wife, are angry, heartbroken, and ashamed. The hospital and the courts not only took away her chance to live a longer life, but they also took away Indy's dignity to pass away in the family home where she belonged. They did succeed in taking Indy's body and dignity, but they can never take her soul. They tried to get rid of Indy without anybody knowing, but we made sure she would be remembered forever. That's part of the quote that he released. And I think that is absolutely beautiful and simultaneously heartbreaking. Moses is a parent. Moses, do you have thoughts at this point that you would like to share?
Oh man, this is such a tragic, heartbreaking case, and we don't want to deny that this little girl was seriously ill and possibly terminally ill. And it does raise the question, as you have mentioned, about helping or relieving the suffering, not removing the sufferer. And it does make me think of the debate over physician-assisted suicide, which we're going to be talking about a lot more as advocates of that try to make it legal in Minnesota this coming year. We know they're going to try. And in Canada and in some countries in Europe, minors can access physician-assisted suicide. And it's not, of course, the exact same thing, right? A terminal patient who will die if life support is removed. And the question of stopping treatment, even when there's a chance that that child might continue to live and have good quality of life, which it sounds like that was the case, versus the act of ending your life. Of course, those are different things. But when you have the medical system on the one hand deciding who lives and who dies, that's extremely worrisome. And then on the other hand, when you have individual people who are under pressure, perhaps, who are perhaps in terrible pain, but still they are trying to essentially take away something that is not theirs. That is to say, their own life, which is sacred, right? You do not get to choose to end your own life. Suicide is wrong in any situation. So I just think of those two things together. I understand, right, the distinctions, but and there are lots of moral and ethical questions that we need to ask as Christians. When is it acceptable to say, do not resuscitate this person, right? Because there are ways of keeping someone on life support, even if they're, functionally never going to recover. That is not what happened in Indi Gregory's case, clearly. And I think for it to be decided in the courts as well is a particularly nasty thing. Why are the
Yeah.
courts banning a family from seeking treatment at a different hospital in a different country? Like, why is that? You know,
Mm-hmm.
even in America, the country with probably the greatest healthcare in the world, you do hear of people leaving the country to seek treatment in specialist hospitals all over the world that perhaps, specialize in a certain thing that they need. That should be great. Like, people should be able to make the choice to make their own healthcare choices with regards to where they're receiving care. So I'm seeing the even though we hope that this type of thing is not going to happen in the US anytime soon, and yet we see people who essentially want this type of thing to be happening. The
Mm-hmm.
care rationing, socialized medicine, where essentially the state decides who gets care. So
Mm-hmm.
those are my thoughts on that tragic
Yeah.
case. I think there's a bit of a hopeful note, though, to end on, right?
There really is, Moses. And I wanted to bring that up before we close this story. One, bright glimmer in this is that Indi was actually baptized before she passed away. Her parents saw to it that she was. And the reason that her parents had her baptized is because they were actually working with some strong Christian lawyers in this court battle. And these Christian lawyers encouraged them to baptize their baby. And these parents were very inspired by the lawyer's faith and diligence in this court battle. And so they ended up baptizing their baby, which I think is so encouraging. And so I think that perhaps baby Indi's tragic death could lead to her parents' faith in Christ. There was an article that was published on Fox News that includes some quotes that I won't be able to read for the sake of time on the podcast, but some quotes from her dad that talks about how when this was going on, he thought, there must be a devil that is at work in this. And if there's a devil, then there must be a God. And so I really pray and hope that it is the case that her parents will be saved in light of this tragedy. And I'm so grateful that baby Indi was baptized before she passed. So
Absolutely.
as we can,
The
yeah,
Lord
as we can
knows
see,
those who are his, right? He will not lose.
yes,
He will not lose one single soul that has been that he has redeemed. I think that's
amen.
the
Yeah.
most hopeful thing that we can say.
It really is. And so, yeah, as we can see, this was a story that is about the sanctity of human life, the inherent value of human life, but it's also about parental rights and a physician's duty to do no harm. And so we will continue to track stories such as these, especially as they make their way to America and hopefully not Minnesota, but perhaps Minnesota. We will keep you guys updated because the same kind of thing could come to America/Minnesota if we fail to stand up for parental rights and for these fundamental values. Moses, let us turn to our highlight story of the podcast episode, which is about how Gen Z is supporting their support for same-sex marriage is actually declining. It's something that a lot of people think that Gen Z is really in favor of, that the majority of Gen Z is rah, rah, rah for. But can you tell us that we're seeing kind of the opposite with some polling?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is in the context of lots of surveys, I think some of which we've discussed on the podcast, that show
Mm-hmm.
Generation Z showing some more conservative tendencies compared with Generation Y, the millennials, that would be my generation, who have always been and continue to be extremely left-wing on a lot of issues. And, to be clear, a majority of people in Gen Z still say in polling that they support same-sex marriage, but that support has plummeted in just 2 years from 80% to below 70%. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
distinct drop, and there is no evidence, the pollsters say, of a similar drop among any other generation. So Gen Z is people born since 1997. Right. And so that includes people who are, I can't do math, but let's see, under 25, right? More or less.
Mm-hmm.
Under 26. It's
I think that
2023, 1997. Okay.
I feel like there's also a discrepancy between who qualifies as Gen Z. Like some people are like, oh, it's
That's true.
98, 96. So, generally the young people. Sorry,
Generally, the
Moses.
young people. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So, what does this mean? This is just one piece of polling. We don't want to overemphasize it. on the other hand, this is important.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll read a little bit. In fact, Gen Z, and this is quoting from the article, is less likely to support same-sex marriage than their older siblings, the millennials. And that's and then it's actually 65% of Generation X and 61% of baby boomers. So this is really interesting to me, and this comes from polling conducted by the American Enterprise Institute Survey Center on American Life, and they make some really interesting points about Gen Z in their writing. So Generation Z is much more diverse than other earlier generations. They're so much more surrounded by technology. And of course, they're much more likely than older people to identify as LGBTQ or to know someone who identifies as LGBTQ. So all of these findings about them becoming or being more conservative have to be seen in that context. They really have so many things going on that would tend to make them less quote unquote conservative, since the stereotype of conservatives that they are white and rural, right? And Gen Z is less white, less rural, more exposed to diversity than earlier generations. So what is explaining this? What's going on here that might be making Generation Z more conservative? And I think one person pointed out on Twitter, made the suggestion on Twitter, that it has to do with possibly transgender ideology, that Generation Z, perhaps many of them support people wanting to identify as, the opposite gender or what have you, but they don't support the gender radicalism in which pronouns are mandated, in which and we've been talking about Gen Z athletes, right? Like I don't remember the name of that University of Pennsylvania guy who went on the women's swimming team and started winning all the medals. Do you remember the name of that person?
Lisa Thomas.
Leah Thomas. Yes, that's right.
Leah
that
Thomas.
was that is the assumed name of this bro, who went on the women's swimming team. So
it's really not funny. It's really so sad.
It is sad. Yeah, right. But maybe, and honestly, maybe, Grace, people in Gen Z are seeing that as kind of a ridiculous and slightly humorous and also slightly sad thing that's going on that they do not support. Yeah. So this person on Twitter was essentially saying, well, I have no trouble with gays and lesbians being in long-term committed relationships and keeping themselves to themselves, but I have a problem with transgender ideology in which my kids are being taught in school that it's normal to be trans or non-binary from kindergarten onward, in which I'm coerced into using pronouns and names that are just not indicative of what's going on, in which athletes are playing for the wrong sports team using the wrong locker rooms, and in which male criminals are being put in women's prisons, in which male homeless people are put in women's homeless shelters, posing a danger to women and girls. It's possible that is what Gen Z is seeing. And they are really the first generation to see LGBTQ everything as a prominent part of American life. Like, I was born a long time ago. I'm a millennial. And like, I went a huge amount of my life without ever being confronted with LGBT stuff at all. Like, I barely knew it existed until probably about 2008 when I was in high school. And that was when Prop 8 in California was going on, when the people of California voted down a measure that would have made same-sex marriage legal in California. And that's
crazy that happened in 2008. That
right.
ages you.
I know.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Never would that fail now. That's insane.
And now, only 7 years after that, the Supreme Court in Obergefell made same-sex marriage the law of every state. So it's been such a huge change, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
in 1997 or 2008, the oldest Gen Z person was only 9 years old, and many of them weren't born yet. So they have grown up in an era where same-sex marriage is essentially normal. Like it's been around since early in their childhood.
I mean, that's me. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, I noticed, yeah, one final thing I think to say is that it isn't just conservatives noticing this trend, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and capitalizing on it. Liberal and centrist people are noticing this trend, seeing Gen Z, that Gen Z is more conservative or is becoming more conservative. So I find that really interesting. Grace, you are part of Gen Z. Do you see this among your peers? What do you think might explain this?
Yeah, I think you're really onto something, Moses, when you say that my generation is the first to really experience this as grown-ups. We're the first to grow up with it being normal, I should say. I think that I'm going to call it same sex mirage. That's what I used to call it when I was a kid. Because it's like this mirage. It's not actually marriage, right? The
Of
state can
course.
say it's marriage, but the church hasn't ordained it. I think that in a way started the debate. Now I know people were lesbian all before same sex mirage became legal and everything. But it started the debate nationally and in so many different states and got people really thinking about it a lot more. And I don't think, unfortunately, enough Christians opposed it at the time. Now, more Christians then did oppose it when it was all coming out and these states were passing different laws and it was just up for votes, like in California and in Minnesota in 2011. But I think not enough people saw that it was a problem because they saw same-sex mirage as this thing in which two different people partake in and it's separate from your life and it doesn't really affect you, so just let other people do what they're going to do. It's not going to affect us if this happens, so just love this other person and let them love one another. Basically, that was the mindset. Unfortunately, not among everyone, but among enough people where the Supreme Court voted the way it did, right? And so now I think what we're seeing among Gen Z and even some millennials and even other people, but especially among Gen Z, I think what we're seeing is we're seeing how gender ideology is downstream from all of that. And like you rightfully brought up, a lot of my generation isn't okay with all the gender ideologies. They're not okay with you impressing your beliefs upon me and making me say something that isn't true. We're not okay with the government or a person saying that we're hateful or offensive because we refuse to call a man a woman. We're not okay with that.
Right.
My generation is comprised of more activists than any other generation. And there's something unjust about that, I think. It feels unjust to have this concept of hate speech constantly floating around our heads when it comes to gender, when it's not hateful to say the truth. So I think that we're really realizing that all this gender ideology stems from gay mirage. It comes from same-sex mirage, it stems from that. And so I think we're starting to think maybe that's wrong too. Maybe that leads to a host of other problems in our society. Maybe, and then I think we're also thinking, I think we're looking around us and we're seeing who seems more fulfilled. And we even talked about polling on the podcast on this season, just about how families, two-parent homes that have a mom and a dad and a traditional family are the most happy, the most fulfilled, the most satisfied. We've seen
Absolutely.
polling on that. And I think that Gen Z doesn't even need to see the polling. They can see it with their own eyes in their own lives, that it is the most fulfilling to live that way. Now, maybe they're not Christians, but they still see the pull of the nuclear family. And so I'm inspired and encouraged by this polling, but that would be my guess. I hope that these numbers continue to drop and that Gen Z continues to see the value of having a mom and a dad and having that nuclear family.
Absolutely.
Moses, why don't you go ahead and close us out with our verse for the
Sure.
week?
Yeah, so thank you guys again so much for watching and listening to the Family Beacon. Make sure to share this with friends and family if you found it interesting. I will say that as we move into the end of November and December, that is such an important time to look at nonprofits that you support and consider supporting them financially. Consider
Mm-hmm.
making a tax deductible donation to Minnesota Family Institute or a non-deductible donation to Minnesota Family Council. There's just so many things that we're working on and that we're doing, but we rely
Mm-hmm.
100% on support from ordinary Minnesotans. So please do consider giving us your support, and we're so thankful to have you guys on board, watching and listening to this podcast. Now approaching the end of our third season, which is
Whoop,
absolutely
whoop.
amazing. No idea that we would be able to last this long and continue to increase our audience. And I hope that it's been a blessing for you guys who have been along for the ride. And I hope that this verse is a blessing too. I'm going to read from Colossians 3, and I find this verse just to be so incredible. 3:15 through 17. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, through psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. An incredible benediction for us as we move into this weekend and next week. And I pray that will be a blessing to you guys, to everyone who hears it. So from me and Grace, thank you so much for watching and listening to the Family Beacon podcast, where you can get the facts and stand for truth. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.